Meanwhile, Palestinian officials and factions have condemned the accord between the UAE and Israel aimed at normalizing ties between the two.
This deal will not serve the Palestinian cause at all, but will serve the Zionist narrative. This kind of behavior encourages the occupation to deny the rights of the Palestinian people and continue its crimes against the Palestinian people. What we always request is to support the right of resistance against the occupation and not make relations with this occupier. We can resist the annexation through a Palestinian resistance supported from Arab and international world and not through these normalization agreements.
Hamas resistance movement described the deal as a stab in the back. The Palestine Liberation Organization slammed the agreement, saying the deal is weakening the Palestinian position. The Fatah movement said the UAE is flouting its national, religious, and humanitarian duties toward the Palestinian cause. The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called the deal an aggression against Palestinians and a betrayal of their cause. He also called for an emergency meeting of the Arab League. Yemen's Ansarullah movements also strongly denounced the deal and called it a provocative move. And now joining us for some extended coverage on the story is Scott Bennett, former U.S. Army psychological warfare officer out of San Francisco, and Mr. Gordon Duff, senior editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Michigan. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program here to get your respective perspectives on this. Mr. Gordon Duff, we're going to start with you. Your initial thoughts on this, please.
Well, the idea that it's a betrayal, that it's unexpected is duplicitous. The UAE has been involved in back pocket deals with Israel for forever. I've been party to some of those personally. I've worked at the UAE and with their defense technologies for years, and we regularly worked with Raphael and Elbit. It was, they were always partners there. The history of this relationship is with the UAE is to whether engagement will work or not. We have so many more horrible things that are going on now that Israel's doing. The UAE is never going to take a role, a moral high ground. This is a country with 2.2 million Bangladeshis living in virtual slavery. The UAE is not in a position to take a high ground about anything. If anything, they're as close as possible to Israel in many of the things that Israel does. For a visitor, the UAE is a wonderful place, but if you are there and you're not one of the Arab elites, the 10, 15, 17% of the people there, the UAE is quite a horrific place. But there was no way to hold a solid Arab world together. We know for absolute certain that Saudi Arabia and Israel have been working together since the 1980s. They've been under the table again, one and the same. We've seen Turkey and Israel cooperated fully against Syria for year after year until supposedly this Saudi Arabia, Turkey, ISIS, and Israel coalition supposedly broke apart, and we know it really didn't. This is going to give Israel a chance to stick its nose into Libya, which they've really wanted to do. It'll give them a position with one of the three factors. In this case, it'll be the legislative group in Tobruk. Israel will be marching around there as well, and quite publicly using those hotels. They'll be out on the veranda at the Shangri-La Hotel, which the Israelis have always wanted to do. They're going to have this, but this is a hollow victory. And just because they'll have an embassy within almost artillery range of Iran is not a victory for Netanyahu, and it's not going to fix his problems by any means.
Thank you, Gordon. And Mr. Scott Bennett, I'd like to welcome you to the program. And now, Scott, we know that both Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu were desperate for some kind of victory in their policy, especially in the Middle East. Does this deal provide them with the with that win that they so desperately are seeking?
Well, the timing of this event is very, very suspicious. I look at it from again, a psychological warfare point of view, and I put together things that happened before and after and during this thing, and as Gordon will confirm, you know, the overwhelming evidence indicates that the Israelis fired missiles at at Beirut, at the area where it was alleged to have been an explosion of the ammonium nitrate, and intelligence has yielded quite a contrary explanation. And the fact that I think it's overwhelming that Israel launched missiles to this area, it had identified it previously as an intelligence depot. That, of course, was artificial as well. The intelligence is yielding that a ship was loaded with rocks and granite and dirt and pretended to be ammonium nitrate. This event, which collapsed not only the building in Beirut and crippled the port, but also seems to have effectively triggered an immediate revolution and government overthrow, coup d'etat, color revolution in Beirut, is an indicator to me this was a psyop, this was pre-planned to trigger a domino effect. And I think Donald Trump recognized it was an attack. He said it was an attack, but I think the Israelis have manipulated the situation, and their agenda was to demonstrate that it would follow similar tactics and courses. And the United Arab Emirates, which is very, very weak, as Gordon observed wisely, in its political leadership, they are you know, a very thin thread away from a revolution themselves as a country, as a leadership, as a government. And most likely the Israelis have exploited that vulnerability and that fear to say, we need an immediate ceasefire, an immediate agreement, or else the Middle East is going to turn into a war, and this is going to collapse the Trump presidency, because Trump will be seen embroiled in this, and Americans will leave him in droves at the last minute in the election. I think that was part of the political calculus of Donald Trump. He recognized this could blow up. I think the Israelis, of course, planned it that way, so that they would fire a missile, implode the government. The failure of the Lebanese government was, of course, they did not say immediately, we've been attacked, this is a declaration of war, and we're telling the United Nations that Israel is responsible. Instead, they fell over the weight of their own inaction and allowed these operatives to come in and generate revolution. So the peace accord and United Arab Emirates and all of these anti-Iranian players and focus is just part of the Oded Anon plan, but I don't think it's going to have any positive effect. I think it may preserve the UAE for a while, but I don't think other nations are going to follow through, and I certainly don't think the Israelis are going to honor anything that they say. Any agreement that they make, of course, is about as worthless as you know, the paper it's written on.
Thanks. And Gordon, you know, the Emiratis are using language as if this deal somehow benefits Palestinians and kind of has Palestinian interests and cause, you know, accounted for within it. But Palestinians strongly disagree, to say the least. Why do you think so?
Well, the Palestinians have been abused by everyone so long. They're certainly the most patient people on earth. First of all, I want to comment about what Scott had said, and some of the things Scott said are still classified, which makes me wonder why he said them, but he's not supposed to. This issue with the timing closely tied to Beirut and the amount of evidence there, you know, we received reports from the military there within minutes of the air attack by Israel. We have video of the planes dropping weapons. I mean, there's a massive amount, and the internet is being cleaned of it with this. And Trump had this story totally correct and stood by his guns on this. And I'm, you know, Scott and I don't share a lot of things about Donald Trump, but Donald Trump took a solid position, wouldn't allow himself to be pushed around. And when the Israelis tried to pull the string of Mike Esper, America's defense secretary, not only did Trump shut Esper up, but then told Esper that if Trump wins the election, I'm not thinking that could happen, but Espert's going to be thrown on his tail. None of us get an easy view of what Israel's actual influence is in the Emirates. The Emirates, to an extent, I think we're misreading Israel's influence in Washington, which is waning. The Jewish population of the United States, powerful, wealthy, it's largely an elite population, are very intelligent, capable voters, and certainly know where to spend their money. And they are very much, American Jews are very much at war with Benjamin Netanyahu, as are a significant number of the Israeli people. The cohesiveness that holds Israel together and that continual backing where Netanyahu can just stomp on the Palestinians, like cutting off their fuel supplies today, that was always going to bring a little cheer with the Bolshevik Likudists, and it's no longer the case. There's a broader stretch here too, and Scott may want to comment on this as well, but the airways are opening up right now, and we are watching teams move back and forth between the Emirates and Sudan and Ethiopia as we're speaking, trying to set a foothold there against the Russians and Chinese. The Emirates feel that they have to move into Africa to survive economically because their days of peddling oil pretty much over. They're very, very broke, and they're trying to be a player without the muscle, and they think that muscle is going to come by renting it from Israel, and we're going to see how that works.
And Scott, I want you to respond to that and also answer this for me. To Gordon's point, there's always been these behind-the-scenes arrangements and coordination between Riyadh and Tel Aviv, or Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv. So why is Abu Dhabi now one of, just after Egypt and Jordan, one of only 3 Arab countries to come out of the closet and make this thing wide open and known for everyone to know?
Well, they're very soft-headed, effeminate, weak people, the United Arab Emirate leadership, as are the Saudis. They couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag, and they're 1 inch away from being overthrown by the destitute, the hungry, and the revolutionary people in their country because of the abysmal treatment and the conditions that have been created and the enormous hubris that permeates their entire cultural identity. And I think that's catching up to them. I think Gordon's right. The Emiratis, as many others, are recognizing that the oil is drying up, but they don't possess the intrinsic creativity or flexibility of character in order to adapt their economic modalities to something in the next century. They just don't have it. They're a very limited culture and mentality, and I think they're desperate for self-preservation. So they're very short-sighted. They are thinking that Israel will somehow defend them and not invade them and not disintegrate them, but that again shows their ignorance, because Israel will sucker them in and then stab them in the back as soon as they can. Netanyahu, I think, is a sociopath, and the sooner he's removed by force by his own people and charged with treason and perhaps executed for the crimes that he's done, including sending Israeli military forces into Palestinian neighborhoods and showering the buildings with feces and garbage trucks and shutting off the electricity and water to the Palestinian people. I mean, it's horrendous. It's startling that the world has not destroyed any blockade or flotilla or any of these sanctions or any of these actions that Israel has done to cut off these areas. But I do think it's going to be a failure by the Israelis. I do disagree with Gordon. I think Donald Trump has an overwhelming possibility of being elected because of the mental disintegration of Biden. I do also think Biden's going to be removed, possibly assassinated, and replaced with Gavin Newsom. I just don't see them putting him as president. But I think Biden has scared the American public, and it's not because people like Trump. It's because people know that the war and the chaos that we've seen in America would only continue. Now, that's also to say Trump is not a man of war. I don't think is looking to go into conquest into Iran. He's not going to back a war that Israel starts, and that's why he said up close, this was an attack. The only thing he didn't say was Israel did the attacking, but that was telling Israelis that we are not going to jump into a war. We're not going to fight for you. We're not that. Those days are over with George Bush and Barack Obama. And Trump has been trying to back us away from Middle Eastern invasions and such. He is surrounded by Zionists. He is given a lot of bad information, bad intel. Liars surround him at every turn. But also, I think he has a pulse on the American people, and he recognizes Americans do not want any more wars or any more military deployments. And he's trying to hack down a lot of the military-industrial generals and parasites and bureaucrats, which have misguided him. But this action seems, I think, in the president's eyes, to give at least him an opportunity to escape. If you heard his words, President Trump said, "We don't need to be there anymore." That means Americans are coming home. We're leaving the United Arab Emirates. We're leaving Qatar. We're leaving Syria. We're leaving these areas that nobody wants their sons and daughters from Kansas or Idaho or Georgia to go and die in. Those globalist days are over. So I think that is the primary motivation of Donald Trump. And what we see with the United Arab Emirates and Israel is going to be a flash in the pan, and probably UAE is going to be toppled very soon, just like Lebanon was.
Thanks, Scott. And Gordon, I'm going to get the last word. And, Robert C. O'Brien, the White House National Security Advisor, he proclaims the president should win the Nobel Peace Prize for trying to put this accord together. Do you agree or disagree with him? We have about a minute and a half left. Why or why not? Please go ahead.
Well, what we're beginning to think is that Trump's hydroxychloroquine has brought about the intellectual demise. He was never the brightest guy in the world, but he's always been something of a sociopath, a raving lunatic. And although we've got Scott and his love of QAnon here, but Trump is extremely mentally ill, and we've seen a serious breakdown. We're seeing signs of serious dementia, Alzheimer's, in Trump. And as far as all of the people he's surrounded with that are betraying him, every single one of them he appointed, and then he fires them and hates them, and he hires more even worse people. Remember, this is the guy who murdered General Soleimani, and trying to put a smiling face on the sociopath that killed the greatest military leader of our time that murdered him. That war crime. How do you defend that? And of course, the same thing here, unleashing troops on the American people, and then today, threatening to defund our postal system to rig an American election. The same guy who suggested we all start drinking bleach. I don't even. It's a clown circus out of Washington right now. And as far as any intent in dealing with this, I haven't seen any signs that anybody's in charge in Washington, other than maybe Trump's exceedingly good friend, his closest friend, Benjamin Netanyahu, the guy that Scott hates so much, is Trump's handler, Trump's mentor, and Trump's closest associate.
And that was echoed by Rex Tillerson. It's funny you say that. And Scott, you know what? I see you smiling over there, so I was going to wrap it up. I'm going to give you about 40 seconds to get your final thoughts in, bud. Go ahead.
Well, we choose the president who's the lesser of two evils, and Trump has made a lot of mistakes, and I haven't backed really a lot of his foreign policy. I think the treatment of Iran has been the biggest mistake of his entire presidency, and I'm always hopeful that some smart person or a group of persons, perhaps everybody that went to the New Horizons conference, will advise him about how Iran really should be one of the closest friends and allies of the United States. There's no reason it shouldn't be. It's a moral country. It's a faithful country. It's a great country and a great people. I don't think Donald Trump is quite the demoniac lunatic as Gordon Duff sees in the mirror, but perhaps he does have some accuracy with regards to the mental disintegration. Although I do think it applies more to Joe Biden. Joe Biden is probably a less hopeful candidate to the American people than Donald Trump. And again, you have to pick your lesser of two evils, and I think Donald Trump is someone that is simply looking to quell the unrest in the United States, stop the military adventurism all over the world, and I think he's been honestly doing that. He's not done it perfectly, but he's not gone in and done it with the same viciousness that Biden would do. Biden was responsible for all these Middle East wars, not Donald Trump, and Biden would probably continue these Middle East wars and forget his own name in the process.
Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us here with your respective perspectives on the program. Scott Bennett, former U.S. Army psychological warfare officer out of San Francisco, California, and Gordon Duff, senior editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Michigan. And viewers,